Travelling at hundreds of miles an hour for many has become the norm, even comfortable. For many racking up those air miles, we eat, we sleep and we work without even giving a second thought to how fast they're travelling. It's just a normal part of the society that we live in. But as with new technology, there's always concerns, and a good example was the humble mobile phone. When phones started to gain popularity in the mid-1990s, there were worries and concerns that radiation emitted increased the risk of cancer. Of course, these reports were unfounded, but even over 30 years later, the phone companies are still having to reassure people. For the Victorians, the spread of information came from three main sources: word of mouth, letters, and of course, the printing presses. Just like today, reporters were always looking for the next big story, the next sensation, or the next scandal, anything that would make those papers fly off the shelves. The magazine Punch took this one step further by making use of the average person's illiteracy and created the first printed cartoons, presenting news in a satirical way and in a format that nearly all could understand. It was no secret that railways were dangerous things, especially at the start of the passenger era. The modern railway today would shudder at the amount of risk a shunter would take, while the shunter would just consider it a part of the job. In the year 1840 alone, 28 major railway accidents and collisions occurred, with hundreds more in shunting yards and stations. Those opposed to the railways were only too happy to report to the papers in the hope that these would sway the public to use alternative travel. Between the 1830s and the 1860s, technology had blossomed, and the locomotive design had allowed engines to reach speeds of 40 to 50 miles an hour, over double to what rocket had achieved. The extra speed also brought its own concerns. It was reported that ladies, who were already considered delicate by standard, were actively discouraged from travelling alone due to the fear of the rapid speed would not only cause a mental toll, but also a physical one as well. There was obviously no truth in these reports, and as more women travelled, the rumours were quickly quashed. But in the 1860s, newspapers began to report on incidents so unusual it caused people to question. It was January 1865, a cold, bitter morning, causing many to take shelter in their waiting rooms, where coal fires brought welcome relief. Only the rumble of the Carnforth to Liverpool train made the people move, its locomotive steam turning a bright white as it hit the frosty air. Only the first class would get heating on board and were eager to get on, while others shuffled out of the waiting room reluctant to leave the warm, toasty fire. Other than the odd grumble, no one reported anything untoward. The door slammed, the guard whistled, and with a heave, the train set off. Suddenly a scream and a scuffle echoed down one of the carriages. As there was no corridor, all the other passengers could do was only pray as the wails and shouts filtered through the wooden walls. As the train stopped in Lancaster, the passengers all got out expecting to see a scene of devastation. In that compartment instead, they saw a very confused but perfectly polite man. If it wasn't for his torn clothes and the gun in his hand, he would have probably claimed innocence. It might sound like a reporter having a lark, but before long other reports of passengers' behaviour started to filter through. Quickly it became headline news. The papers called it railway madness. Cases ranged from men pulling their clothes off and running around naked to acts of violence with dire consequences. It was nearly always men, and it always happened when the train was in motion. When the train stopped, the men appeared to regain their senses, with no memory of what they had done. The railway companies were scratching their heads. Just what was going on? Their crews didn't seem to be affected, and the episodes were not restricted to class or social status. In the end, the railways had no clear cause, and a new bylaw was passed that if a passenger was acting this way, then they would need to be isolated. Not exactly practical on trains with no corridors. The doctors, though, had a theory what was going on. Suspension in the carriages was there, but it was basic, so passengers would feel every bump and mark on the track. These vibrations, the doctors feared, would travel up to the brain, causing it to vibrate, and the vibrations were the reason for the behaviour. Why it didn't affect women, crews and children, the doctors couldn't answer. But the paper still ran with it, much to the dismay of the railway companies. As quickly as it arrived, the episodes appeared to cease. Still, the railways took it seriously and took strides to develop ways for passengers to communicate if there was a problem, and corridor compartments so passengers could move freely if needed. Another widely documented affliction was a condition known as railway spine. Also known as Ericsson's disease, this only occurred in railway crash survivors. Victims would be relatively fine, with many walking away from the crash. However, days later, they would find themselves in great shooting pains down their backs, with some of the more severe being unable to walk. Many railway insurers would call the passengers frauds, vying for compensation for fake injuries, but it was quickly apparent the trauma was very real. The matter was discussed by surgeons John Ericsson from the University College Hospital, who believed that, while unseen from the outside, the forces enacted on the body during a collision could cause the spinal cord to swell and give the symptoms, while another surgeon, William Page, challenged the explanation, instead calling it a disorder of the brain and nervous system brought on by extreme shock. His work led to us to understand the impact of shock on the body, and it was the start of recognising on what we now know as PTSD. As Page's medical research became more accepted, the term railway spine was used less and less. Today we would recognise the symptoms as PTSD and offer a wide range of services and counselling to help. It really is a mystery what happened to the men in the carriages. There's never been a credible explanation, and there's simply too many incidents to call it isolated. It is a mystery, and it's unlikely to be solved. Was it real? Or was it fake to just sell papers? Why don't you decide?